screens.
Ooh, yeah, they're everywhere.
Right. You see these massive steel skeletons of shiny new apartment complexes going up, and it paints this incredibly optimistic picture of a booming city. But if you walk just a few miles away into the administrative offices of Fayette County Public Schools, you see a completely different reality.
It's a totally different world over there.
It really is. You see a school board staring down this massive financial crisis, and they are desperately trying to figure out how to avoid, laying off support staff or cutting the schedules of the people who actually keep the schools running.
The contrast is just jarring.
Yeah.
I mean, you have multi-million-dollar private development surging in the exact same moment that the foundational public institution of the city is, well, basically searching the couch cushions for emergency cash.
Exactly. And those two realities are actually colliding today in a very direct, literal way. Which brings us to the stack of sources you sent over for us to dig into. You handed us this mountain of local news reports, tax documents, city council agendas, all specifically focused on Lexington.
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack here.
There is. So we're doing a custom-tailored deep dive into your notes today on local radio because you've highlighted a story that serves as like a masterclass in how modern cities actually function, or I guess struggle to function.
Right. Sometimes struggle is the better word.
So let's unpack this. We're looking at two major housing developments asking the city for special tax arrangements. But they're asking for these breaks at the exact moment the school district is facing a historic budget shortfall.
And to really grasp the gravity of what is happening in Lexington, you have to look past the architectural renderings of these buildings, right? And you have to examine the financial engineering behind them.
The nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, exactly. Because the debate centers entirely around a mechanism called an industrial revenue bond, or an IRB. And unless you understand how an IRB fundamentally rewires the tax code, it's impossible to understand why the school board is in such an agonizing position right now.
Well, let's break that mechanism down for everyone. From your notes, the traditional way development works is pretty straightforward. A private developer buys land, builds a huge apartment complex, and pays annual property taxes based on the assessed value of that complex.
Yeah, the standard model.
Right, and if the building becomes more valuable, the tax bill goes up. That money flows to a city, the public library, the health department, and crucially, the schools. But an industrial revenue bond completely short-circuits that process.
It does. It acts essentially like a legal magic trick. Under an IRB, the Lexington Fayette Urban County government steps in and issues bonds to finance the project.
Okay.
But the really crazy part of the deal is that the legal title of the property is actually transferred to the merged city government for a set period of time, usually, 10 or 15 years.
Wait, so the city actually owns the building?
Legally, yes. The city holds the deed, and then they lease the property right back to the developer.
And the reason a developer would ever agree to hand over the title to their own building is because local governments do not pay property taxes to themselves.
Exactly. The moment the city's name goes on that deed, the property is wiped completely off the local tax rolls.
Wow.
It generates zero standard property tax dollars. But, obviously, a massive new apartment building still requires city resources.
Right. There are still kids living there who need to go to public school.
Residents who use the library, folks who rely on the health department, all of that. So to bridge that gap, the city requires the developer to negotiate a payment in lieu of tax agreement.
The pilot.
Yeah, the pilot. Because the property isn't generating standard taxes, the developer negotiates a separate fixed payment schedule directly with the local taxing bodies. And in Lexington, the biggest player at the table by far is Fayette County Public Schools, or FCPS.
So, reading through the mechanics of a pilot agreement in your notes, it operates remarkably like a subscription service.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, like as a homeowner, your property taxes fluctuate. If the real estate market explodes and your house doubles in value, your tax assessor makes sure you pay for that rising value.
Which is how cities afford to grow.
Right. But a pilot agreement completely shields the developer from that reality. Instead of a fluctuating tax burden, the developer gets a locked-in subscription fee. They agree to a specific schedule of payments for the next 10 to 15 years, regardless of what happens to the broader real estate market.
And the underlying logic for the developers comes down to risk mitigation. Commercial real estate is heavily dependent on securing massive bank loans.
Sure.
When a developer can walk into a bank and point to a pilot agreement, they can say, look, I know down to the exact dollar what my tax burden will be in the year 2034.
That predictability is huge for a bank.
It makes the project infinitely more attractive to investors. But the trade-off is severe for the public services. The school district and the library are forced to accept those capped terms, meaning they completely miss out on the natural upside of rising property values in a, gentrifying downtown area.
Which forces us to look at the actual projects asking for this deal right now, starting with the Rose Tower. Based on your research, this is not a shiny new luxury build.
No, not at all.
Rose Tower is a 1960s-era building at the corner of Rose, Vine, and Main Streets. It holds 168 units of senior affordable housing, and the developer looking to take it over is a group called Related Affordable.
And they are proposing a $9.4 million comprehensive overhaul of the building, which is significant. We're looking at an investment of roughly $56,000 per unit.
That's a massive renovation.
It is. The plans call for completely new appliances, total overhauls of the aging bathrooms, brand new HVAC systems, new boilers, and major security upgrades.
The detail in your stack of articles that genuinely stopped me, though, was about the power supply. They are adding a massive backup generator to the building.
Yes, that is a huge factor here.
Right now, in its current state, Rose Tower does not have a backup generator. The vice president of Related Affordable, Sam Stroberg, explicitly noted that if the power goes out in downtown Lexington today, these elderly residents are practically trapped because the elevators just cease to function.
It highlights a severe, immediate safety vulnerability. And beyond the physical upgrades, the terms of the IRB ensure long-term accessibility, which is key.
How so?
Well, out of the 168 units, 120 will be permanently designated for seniors using housing choice vouchers, the program formerly known as Section 8.
Okay.
And the remaining 48 units will be restricted to individuals making 60% of the area median income. For a single person living in Lexington, that caps their allowable income at just under $43,020 a year.
So the human benefit is undeniable here. You are taking vulnerable seniors, giving them modernized heating, ensuring they aren't trapped in the dark during a storm, and locking in their rent.
Exactly.
But let's look at the pilot math you highlighted, because this is where the tension with the school district really spikes. Currently, without any renovations, the Rose Tower property pays FCPS about $44,000 a year.
Right.
Upfront impact fee of $165,000. Then, in year one, they would pay the district $65,000, with that payment increasing by just 3% annually over the 15-year life of the bond.
And the school board has to weigh that very carefully. I mean, they get a sudden injection of cash today, but they are accepting a very slow growth rate for the next decade and a half.
But I have to push back on this arrangement when you look at the scale of the players involved here. Related Affordable is not a scrappy local builder.
No, they are huge.
Yep. They are headquartered in New York. They are the largest private owner of affordable housing in the entire country, managing over 65,000 apartments with a portfolio valued north of $5 billion.
That's right.
So if they have billions in assets, why are we accepting a $65,000 first-year payment to our local schools? Is that truly a fair trade for allowing a massive corporation to bypass standard property taxes on a downtown high-rise for 15 years?
Well, you have to view it through the lens of preservation versus the open market.
Okay.
Related Affordable's entire business model is built on acquiring and preserving these properties.
Okay.
They have a documented history showing they never convert affordable units to market-rate luxury condos. For a city like Lexington, which is rapidly losing its affordable housing stock, guaranteeing 168 senior apartments for the long haul is incredibly difficult to achieve otherwise.
I mean, I guess that makes sense.
The developers argue that this tax arrangement isn't just some corporate giveaway. They say it is the necessary municipal subsidy required to prevent the free market from bulldozing those apartments and replacing them with, high-end lofts.
Fair point. I see the preservation argument there. Rose Tower is ultimately a massive preservation effort. But the second project in your notes, Midland Station, introduces a completely different set of variables.
It really does. It's a totally different beast.
This is a ground-up, brand-new construction project proposed for the corner of Midland and 3rd, developed by Scott Shapiro. It calls for retail space on the first floor and 258 apartments across 2 buildings. And it is specifically being billed as workforce housing.
Right, and the term workforce housing targets a slightly higher income bracket than the Rose Tower demographic. It is aimed at individuals making between 80 and 120% of the area median income.
Which means what exactly in dollars?
In practical terms, that means an individual earning less than about $70,000 a year.
And the developer is asking for a 10-year industrial revenue bond for this one. The legal requirements here are interesting too. State law dictates that only 20% of the project has to be designated as workforce housing to qualify for the IRB incentive.
Yeah, that threshold is surprisingly low.
Right. Now, the developer has publicly stated that the majority of the apartments will meet that criteria, but legally, they only have to hit that 20% mark.
And the pilot agreement structured for Midland Station was calculated by Commonwealth Economics. According to their projections, the payment to Fayette County Public Schools would begin at $45,000 in the first year.
Just 45,000.
Yeah, and by the 10th year, that annual payment grows to $147,751. So when you aggregate the payments over the full decade, the project will contribute a total of $732,216 to the school district.
Looking at your notes, the math on this Midland project is just wild to me. We are talking about an enormous 258-unit development, and the school district is only getting $45,000 in year one.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
But there is a detail in here that is steeped in an almost painful irony. This proposed apartment complex sits quite literally right behind the hill, which is a Fayette County Public Schools Technology Center.
Okay, next door.
Exactly. And the developer specifically emphasized that they are willing to set aside some of these workforce apartments for local teachers who meet the income guidelines.
It is a stunning paradox.
Yeah.
The education system is basically being asked to subsidize the housing solution for its own payroll shortcoming.
Exactly. So what does this all mean? The school district has to forfeit its standard future property tax revenue to subsidize a private apartment building, just so its own underpaid teachers might actually be able to afford rent in the city they serve.
It's circular logic.
It feels like we are applying a highly complicated bandage to a symptom rather than treating the underlying disease of stagnant educator wages.
The circular dependency here is severe. I mean, ideally, if teachers cannot afford market rate rent, the community would just raise their salaries.
Right, pay them more.
But the school budgets are stretched to the breaking point. Because the district cannot afford to pay more, the city relies on private developers to build restricted income workforce housing. But then the developers cannot make the math work on restricted rent without tax breaks from the very schools that employ the teachers.
Wow.
The system essentially cannibalizes itself to keep functioning.
Here's where it gets really interesting for you as a listener, because we have to look at the timeline of all this. The reason these specific numbers, the $165,000 upfront fee from Rose Tower, the $732,000 over 10 years from Midland Station.
Right.
The reason they are being fiercely debated right now is because Fayette County Public Schools is trapped in an immediate financial crisis.
The scheduling of all this could not be more dramatic. The school board is slated to vote on whether to accept these pilot agreements on May 21st.
Okay.
And on that exact same day, in the exact same meeting, they must also vote on the district's massive $711 million general fund budget.
And your sources make it clear that this budget vote is grim. The district recently uncovered that its financial statements have been misstated for years, which masked these deep structural deficits.
Huge mess.
They are incredibly cash-strapped. The proposed budget includes cutting the scheduled workdays for numerous employees. They are bracing for unknown numbers of layoffs, specifically targeting crucial support staff.
Right, the folks who run the cafeterias, clean the buildings, and drive the buses.
Exactly. They are even evaluating selling off district-owned real estate properties just to generate emergency liquidity.
So the school board is trapped in a brutal catch-22. On one side of the ledger, they are desperate for immediate cash to prevent layoffs.
Sure.
When you are looking at having to fire support staff, that $165,000 upfront impact fee from the Rose Tower developer looks like a vital, immediate lifeline. It is money they can deposit tomorrow.
But on the other side, if they accept these pilot agreements, they are kneecapping their own future. Giving up 10 to 15 years of standard property tax growth on two massive downtown developments severely worsens their long-term structural deficit.
You are trading a one-time cash injection today for a permanent handicap on your tax base for the next decade.
If property values in downtown Lexington continue to skyrocket over the next 15 years, the school district will be entirely locked out of that economic boom regarding these two massive properties.
Exactly. Their revenue from these sites will barely creep up by 3% a year, while inflation, healthcare costs, and educational expenses compound at a much faster rate.
Just put yourself in the room for a second. Imagine being a school board member sitting on that dais on May 21st. You were just a local citizen trying to serve your
Sort of
community.
volunteer position, mostly.
Right. And suddenly you are forced to act as an urban planner, trying to determine if downtown Lexington has enough workforce housing. You are forced into the role of a tax assessor, trying to project real estate values out to the year 2041.
It's impossible.
You are acting as a forensic financial auditor, trying to untangle years of misstated district books. And you have to juggle all of this complex financial engineering while physically looking out into an audience full of support staff members who are terrified they might lose their livelihoods that very evening. The human pressure of that moment is immense.
It really is. And this is why it is essential to zoom out and evaluate the ultimate trade-offs for the city of Lexington.
Okay.
When you step back from the immediate budget crisis,
Yeah.
you have to identify who actually wins and who absorbs the losses in these arrangements.
Well, the residents are the clearest winners. If the Rose Tower IRB is approved, 168 low-income seniors get to live in safe, modernized apartments with a backup generator so they aren't vulnerable during the next major storm.
That's a huge win.
And if Midland Station goes forward, working professionals, including the teachers working at the tech school right next door, get access to affordable rent in the heart of the city.
The developers are also clear beneficiaries. I mean, they secure the long-term financial predictability required to obtain their bank loans. That allows them to expand or preserve their multi-billion-dollar portfolios while aggressively mitigating their tax risk.
But the costs are entirely absorbed by the public safety net, the local health department, the public library system, and heavily Fayette County Public Schools. They all take a severe haircut on their potential future tax revenue to make these private developments viable.
And we should probably clarify that May 21st is not the final finish line here.
Oh, right. Good point.
Even if the school board looks at their dire budget and reluctantly approves these pilot agreements, the deals are still not finalized. The industrial revenue bonds still have to pass through a city economic development board.
And then the city council, right?
Exactly. Ultimately, they require a full vote of approval from the Lexington Fayette Urban County Council. The school board is simply the first hurdle in the process.
It is a dizzying web of overlapping interests. You have a New York development giant with $5 billion in assets overhauling 1960s architecture. You have a local developer trying to build housing so the city's own teachers can afford to live near their classrooms.
Yeah.
And bearing the weight of it all is a public school district that can barely balance its own misstated checkbook, being forced into the role of the primary financial engine for the city's affordable housing strategy.
It reveals a fascinating vulnerability in how mid-sized American cities are engineering their growth right now. We rely entirely on these 10 to 15-year bond structures to incentivize development today, effectively deferring the true cost to the future.
Which leaves us with a pretty chilling thought to consider as you watch those construction cranes over Lexington. We focus so much on the immediate tension of getting these buildings constructed, but what happens in year 16?
That's the million-dollar question.
What happens when these pilot agreements finally expire and a cash-strapped city suddenly inherits decades of deferred infrastructure maintenance, aging utility grids, and maxed-out school capacities that haven't been properly funded for 15 years?
It's scary to think about.
We might not just be solving a housing crisis today. We might be building a municipal debt bomb that is scheduled to detonate on a very specific date in the future.
It is a phenomenal question. I mean, are we actually building sustainable progress or just renting some time until the bill finally comes due? And it leads to a bigger, almost philosophical question for you to mull over.
Let's hear it.
If local governments increasingly rely on school tax exemptions to compel private developers to build affordable housing, are we effectively privatizing the social safety net?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, think about it. What happens to a community when the public schools, the very institutions meant to lift people out of poverty, are the ones footing the bill for affordable housing?
That is heavy, but definitely something to think about the next time you drive down Main Street. That wraps up our deep dive into your Lexington notes for today. Keep sending us your sources, and we'll keep unpacking them.